Now you want my favourite story, don't you?
Yes,
My
your
favourite
favourite
passage.
story, your
Well,
passage, as it were.
I think I'm giving the game away, and that's why I haven't been talking about it much so far. I think I would have to say it is. I think I would have to want to go for Emmaus, and I'm just actually wanting to try and find. Yeah. I've long loved the story of Jesus and his and his and the journey to Emmaus, for lots and lots of reasons. I mean, the subversive bit of me loves it because actually it's one of the places in the Holy Land where there are competing sites for where Emmaus actually was. There are 4 competing sites. None of them can clearly claim to be the one, you know, everybody, they all, and I think there's actually something really important about it, about that, the fact that actually there is this ambiguity, because the very story of Emmaus is a story, I think, about ambiguity, the fact that Jesus can only be seen if we're prepared to let him go, as it were. At the same time, you know, as soon as he's seen, and they realize who he is, he disappears from their sight. Going back to my pictures, I put that up for a reason. Here's a couple of pictures on Emmaus that I like. This is by a Chinese artist on the left, and it's seated, you know, they're still traveling to Emmaus. They're still on their journey. The sun is setting. In Chinese art, red is the color of celebration. So the reds that are there strongly in the picture are intended. Jesus appears to be wearing a stole in a diaconal way, which is interesting. There's somebody has pointed out to me that it's on the wrong shoulder, but I'm not the great world expert on diaconal
Well, Alan
stole.
could tell you that.
Yes, I think he probably did at some point. But I think I still think it probably is intended to represent a diaconal soul. We don't see the face of Jesus in this story, in this picture rather, and I think that's quite telling too. That one of the reasons too that I love it is because it takes us through the story of the Old Testament. You know, it was as Jesus. You know, the disciples said to him, you know, we had thought that he was to be the one who was to redeem Israel, as it were. And that theme of redemption that had been begun when Simeon and Anna talk about the redemption of Jerusalem back in the temple, is picked up. And then beginning with Moses and the prophets, he interpreted to them all the things about himself in the scriptures. The sense that you could only understand the New Testament once you have traveled through the old, I think, is part of the story of Emmaus. The fact too that they urged him to stay with them, you know, it wasn't a polite, well, would you like to come in, but we don't really want you here. Urge is a strong word. And you find it used in Acts. I think the only other time in the Lucan writings it appears is in Acts, where Lydia urges Paul to stay with her when in Philippi, and of course that is also a breakthrough passage. That's the point at which I think it's the first time he clearly stays in a Gentile household, that when she urged him to stay, and then you get this sense of the rightness of Jesus being recognized as he's breaking the bread, because those common meals that have been shared between Jesus and his disciples have been the common meals to which the outsiders were invited. They've been so much a part of, an essential part of Jesus's ministry, that it's in the common meal that he is recognized. Now there's another picture of Emmaus on this in my selection here. And it's this picture down on the right here. And it's a picture by Velázquez. And the picture is described as the serving maid at Emmaus. I think it's in an American museum at the moment. And basically, Jesus and the disciples are in the background. They're in that room in the background. And the serving maid who is serving them, so you assume that they're staying at an inn at this point, she is looking at them through the burnished, bright, shining surface of that cooking vessel, right? So she is looking at the cooking vessel, but she's seeing the people. And as she is looking at the cooking vessel and seeing the people, what I think we're meant to see in her face is that she is coming to realize, just before they get there, just who Jesus is. There's a wonderful poem that I've got somewhere around, and you can certainly find. It's worth, I can send you in any case. Couldn't find it quickly now, but by somebody called Denise Levertov, which is actually picturing the thoughts that are going through the mind of the serving maid as she is realizing who the guest is that she has with us, with her that night. And so that speaks to me fairly powerfully too. Now, I put this on, this other thing on my screen because I wanted to show you something that I wrote for just over a year ago. I wrote I wrote a Lent book for churches together in Britain and Ireland. And it was interesting. Originally, it was a Lent book. And then with the encouragement of the folks in CTBI, I added, first of all, a chapter for Holy Week, and then a chapter in which I reflected on the beginnings of the resurrection, if you like. And the very name of this Lent book, Opening the Scriptures, is taken from the Emmaus story, because after they realize who Jesus is, what do they say? Their eyes were opened and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was talking to us on the road, while he was opening the scriptures to us," as it were? And there's a link being made between the opening of the scriptures and the opening of the eyes of the disciples there. So that phrase, opening the scriptures, is what gave me my title for the Lent book. And as you can see, I focused on the Emmaus story in the final section. Let me just read you a bit. I won't read you it all. I can send you, Peter, the PDF of this if you want. Throughout this course, we've returned week by week to address the question that is rooted in the story of the Emmaus Road. What are the biblical passages which make your heart burn within you? That was the sort of focus of the course, that people were asked to think about what scripture passage was it that made your heart burn within you? The question that's there in the Emmaus Road. And but then I went on to say, perhaps the irony is there, but for many of us, it is the story of that journey to Emmaus itself, which is one of the most heart-burning moments that we can find within Christian scripture. It's fascinated poets, artists, and theologians since the beginning of Christian history. As Jesus Christ is for Christians a prism through which the mystery of God's gracious encounter with humanity can be viewed with a particular intensity, so in turn the road to Emmaus becomes a prism to view the story of Christ in itself. Why is this so? And what might this say to us, especially about the gift of Scripture? Scripture and Jesus Christ interpret each other. Word and word belong together. And it's through the words of Jesus to his companions that the Scriptures are open to them. And in turn, the Scriptures enable us to understand more about Jesus. Remembering is an essential part of biblical faith, and that brings in this sense of the Old Testament. You can't understand Jesus without the Old Testament too, as it were. We remember the Exodus, we remember the Last Supper, we remember the one who asked us to remember him. The story of the road to Emmaus bears witness to the importance of remembering. And I think it's no accident that the very word remember can be understood as bringing together those fractured elements of our reality which have been dismembered. By remembering, we become whole and people of one heart. And of course, we remember at the Eucharist, and the Eucharistic links of the supper at Emmaus become important. The opening of the Scriptures, the opening of the eyes of the two travellers, also linked. The connection seems to be deliberately intended as Luke tells us this story. The same, quite rare in the verb in the New Testament, is used by Luke to describe both actions in this passage. What does that really mean for us? Might we suggest that if we really open the Scriptures, we will discover our eyes gradually open to look on what is before us in our new life?